In the Māori world, Tuākana Teina in the literal world means kind of big brother, little brother, kind of like a mentoring concept. Now, tuakana are really important. We honour our elders, but not only honour them, we learn from our elders. And Teina is like the little brother. We all at Teina at one point in life. Then, our experience and the things that we achieve in life, we move on to tuakana where we're actually helping our young ones develop and succeed. So we're all together as a whānau trying to hustle. I think that's the word in this industry. I'm Māori and Pacifica, but we've got Māori and Pacifica representation all throughout our panel today. So very proud to stand on stage with all of you. So on my left we have Gina Cole from the island of Fiji in Pākehā. So Gina wears different hats as well. She's a qualified barrister and solicitor, but also she's a very talented writer. I managed to hear one of your stories performed at one of our Screen Fit Pacifica, one of your short films, and it was a utopian, futuristic portrayal of nuclear winter. So, but Gina's also a Occam Award winner in 2017, won Best First Book for her collection Black Ice Matter. So, very talented, and thank you for being here today. Laura Vincent is Ngāti sorry, I can't read. Mahanga, sorry, can't read my entire nui. So she's currently writing her first and second novels, but is a poet and fiction writer, and her work has been published in various publications, including The Spin-Off, Queer Life and Queer Love, Shelley Magazine, among other publications. But also for the past 15 years, Laura has been a food blog writer. So very talented panellists this morning. We can cook and we can sue someone if we have the chance. So, and next to Laura we have Josiah Morgan, who is kaitahu and kaitahu and Ngāti Maniapoto, sorry, my writing again. He's travelled all the way from Otautahi, Christchurch, to be with us today. And he's an author, he's a writer, he's a published author of a book and 3 chapbooks. I just found out this morning what that meant, so learning something new every day. And his most recent book, Road, a post-Lesbian comedy, is that right? Lesbian? Won the Macmillan Brown Writers Prize in 2021. So definitely I feel honoured to have a kōrero with our panel today about Tuākana Teina and what that means to us and who have been our inspirations. And so from there. So today we are going to start just to get to know our panellists. I'm going to ask each and every one of them what literary character, either film or TV or movies, are more like them and why. So I'll start with you, Gina.
Okay. I don't know if I'm like this character, but the reason I became a background actor is because I wanted to be an orc from The Lord of the Rings. And when The Lord of the Rings was being filmed, I got an agent, and specifically because I wanted to be an orc. I never became an orc, but I did become a farmer who was kidnapped by the orcs. So I think that I'm orc adjacent. And the reason I wanted to be an orc was because I thought it would be a really fun character to be, and they went to orc training school and they wore the prosthetics and they were kind of like the elite extras in the extra tent. So that's as close as I got to being an orc.
So I gather that was for the last Lord of the Rings series.
Yes,
that was
it's called The Rings of Power. At the time when it was being filmed, it was called Unnamed Amazon Project.
It was a real secret in the industry. No one knew about it, right? But everybody
Nobody
knew about
knew it was a very well-known secret.
Thank you for that, Gina. And Laura?
I identify with more than one character. I identify with more than two characters. Perhaps if I list them, it will kind of give you an overview of who I am and my character. So let me see. Homer Simpson, Laura Palmer from Twin Peaks, Nick Miller from New Girl, Charity from Sweet Charity, Proposition Joe from The Wire, Liza Minnelli as Sally Bowles in Cabaret, Faye Dunaway's character in Network, and every character from the 1940s noir Laura, including the character Laura. And I also, for a long time, I related really deeply to Leslie Knope from Parks and Recreation, but I've since come to, upon reflection, realised that perhaps her politics are not particularly, basically I reject any political ideology that is exclusionary of sex workers and fat phobic, and so while I still really appreciate her hustle, I have to take what is good and, leave some behind, but she's still a part of my journey as well. So, yeah.
I love that you have such a wide range of characters, and there's musical theatre references there, so I love that as well. So thank you, Laura, and Josiah.
I really struggled thinking about this, and I was scrolling through characters in my brain last night, chronically online, like young person here, scrolling in my brain. But I woke up this morning and I was like, it's Lily Briscoe from To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. And because she takes herself so seriously and she shouldn't, and then when she should take herself seriously, she doesn't. And the world around her is really normal and mundane, and she observes that. And she's always trying to get at the essence of the truth, maybe, rather than the truth itself.
Great, thank you. Such a diverse range of inspirations, and I love that. So first question, in terms of probably the obvious question, is who were the ones that helped you in your careers in writing? So we're talking about people that mentored you and kind of helped to get to where you are today.
When I was 10 years old, I read Pounamu Pounamu by Witi Ihimaera, and I really loved that book. And I think that really was one of the foundational books for me in my journey to becoming a writer. And then when I later in life met Witi Ihimaera, he came to speak to the Masters of Creative Writing class that I was in, and then I met him another time at the first Samesame But Different festival, and he asked me to be part of one of his anthologies, and so I was kind of hero worship of Witi, and I couldn't believe that this person whose book had such an influence on me was now part of my writing journey. So he was a huge influence on me. And also my supervisor at my Masters of Creative Writing course was Selena Tusitala Marsh. She was a real huge influence on me, and she helped me write my first book, Black Ice Matter. And my PhD supervisor, or my academic supervisors, Tina Makareti and Tom Conroy, who taught me how to write a novel, which was my second book. So they were amazing influences. And of course, my first major influence was my mother, because my father was a lighthouse keeper, so we lived in these really remote areas. The lighthouse keepers don't exist anymore, they're all automated, but because we lived in these really remote areas, my mother had to teach me by correspondence, so she was a huge influence on me because she taught me how to read and write, basically. So yeah, those were some of my influences. There's a lot more, but I
have to tautoko you in terms of Witsi. Obviously, he's been a huge influence to Māori writers, and I know Witsi as well. And he's, I get that kind of, it's Witsi who might feel as well every time I'm around him. But he's quite supportive of young writers.
Yeah, he is, and I feel that real Tuākana Teina relationship with Witty.
Yes.
Definitely, he's definitely very supportive of younger writers.
He is. So thank you. Laura?
My mother was also very influential on me. I grew up in a very, very small, very rural village, and I don't know if anyone else has experienced this, but when you're young and you sort of realise, I've got this creative expression within me, and maybe I don't have a lot of other people that I can relate to, and then you're like, I must walk this road alone, and other people, it's like, no, this is my path to walk alone. It is an isolated road of the writer. And then I grew up a little and I realized, no, you have to make connections. You can't just be on your typewriter in your room, with no influence and no input. So I've been very, very grateful for the generosity of a lot of New Zealand writers and creators. Specifically, Pip Adam has been so wonderfully generous to me, and in a way that sort of models how I want to be, it's like, this is what I want to do when I've got a little bit more behind me, you know what I mean? I want to extend that hand out to some little nervous person living in the middle of nowhere with one goofy little poem. And I really appreciate that. She's, sometimes when someone's so generous to you and you think, you don't have to, you could just be very successful and talented and rest on that laurel, but instead you're actually, reaching out and sharing it and bringing other people up towards you. And also, Esame Ranapere has also been incredibly, generous and cool, and I really appreciate their place in my life as a writer as well, and as a friend. And yeah.
You mentioned connections, and writing is a very solitary discipline, and you were stuck in our own thoughts and our own minds. But how important is connections, and especially reaching out to people for help, or for direction and inspiration?
It's so crucial, and I think if you're a writer or a creative person of any type, and you have some talent, I think I'm talented. I think I can say that, but you can only go so far on your own, and you might even create something that's really good on your own, but the more people that you connect with, and the more you have feedback, and the more that you also connect with other people's work, the more that you're going to grow, and you're going to realize when you look back how far you've come. I also was very fortunate. I did my master's in creative writing at AUT last year, and my supervisor, James George, was a wonderful person. I felt so lucky to have just ended up with him, and it felt like we really connected on so many levels. And I know that I could have, so it was a creative writing master's, so the thesis was a novel manuscript. I could have written the novel on my own, solitary, and it would have been fine, but connecting with the supervisor, connecting with the other people that were doing the thesis as well, it opens it up so much. Yeah, got to have those connections.
Excellent, that's really important. Josiah?
I think I have to start with family as well, like Gina. My grandparents always had these big shelves of tomes of kind of the complete Charles Dickens and the complete Shakespeare, but all in separate volumes. And I never read them. I remember being 5 and being in the house and seeing kind of a body of work laid out like that, and then that being an inspiration to read. And then my parents are both teachers. Sorry to everyone who's over here. I'll just do a quick wave. Oh, thank you. But for me, it was kind of a strange pathway into writing. It was very solitary for a very long time. Anyone who's familiar with my work will know it's violent, unpleasant, hard to read. I think it's funny when you hear it aloud. but a lot of people don't get that on the page. And the first person who really understood that wasn't from New Zealand. It was Dennis Cooper, who is an underground queer writer who originates kind of from the New York scene, but his first book, Closer, like changed my life in high school. It's when I read it, it's this very strange novel about a bunch of people who are all obsessed with, like, I guess what you would now describe as the model twink, but like the imagined ideal of a twink is not a real person. He's just like a body that other people find interesting as a body rather than a person, and that means that body for Dennis as a novelist can then be loaded with other categories and other people's views, and Dennis does this very generous thing where he writes a blog post every day. It's always about strange topics, like it'll be a blog post all about cigarettes, and it's like every time I can find a cigarette mentioned in a poem, every time I can see a cigarette in a shot on cinema, what a cigarette means semiotically and symbolically. But in the comment section of that blog, there's kind of a small community of writers that interact with Dennis, and then on the next day's blog post, he interacts with them in return. And I started talking to Dennis while reading his first 5 books, which operate kind of in a cycle from Closer onward. And eventually I ended up writing and getting my first book, Inside the Castle, published because of interacting with Dennis. And so that's a very strange relationship. We've never met each other. We've never even spoken vocally to each other. But there's no way I'd be sitting here without Dennis seeing my work and understanding it, which is, for me, an uncommon thing, at least for the work that happened in that kind of like early realm. But then, since that's been published, there are a few people. I mean, like Nathan is a big hustler for me. I think you're a better hustler of my work in New Zealand than I am. Essa as well, Chris Teese, Claudia Jardine. A lot of peers, I think. I think that's an underrated thing in the New Zealand scene, is like people at maybe even a similar stage. There's a lot of uplifting of each other's work and a lot of exchange that goes on. And so I feel like people who may still think of themselves as Teina are also Tuākana for each other, and there's that kind of exchange process happening. Yeah.
As Tuākana, there must have been a point in all of our lives, a piece of literary work just changed your life. For me, it was The Colour Purple. I was 9 years old. I was living in the small town Taranaki, and a takata poi young boy living in a house full of males, and I really resonated. Although it was a story that was far from Taranaki, it was about black women oppression and overcoming oppression and abuse and light at the end of the tunnel. It really impacted me. It's a core lesbian love story, part of that story. It's the first time I kind of saw myself in any literary world, and then the movie came out and that really inspired me as well. I think there's a point in our lives, especially young age, where you need those representations to say that you're not alone, and you get that from, for me it was a literary piece of work. But what literary piece of work helped you as a young child understand your place in the world and that that you're not alone?
I always have to go back to Pounamu because that book, I could really relate to that book because Whitty wrote about things that I could relate to in my life, like the aunties playing cards, and just the kind of Māori community that he wrote about I could relate to as a similar to Fijian culture. And I didn't, of course, know at 10 years old, I didn't really know that I was gay. I thought it was a bit weird. But I didn't know what it was or what was weird about me. And I didn't know, of course, that Whitty was gay, and I don't think he was out then. But then I read Nights in the Garden of Spain, is it? Which is, and the uncle story, which are very explicitly gay stories, and also The Colour of Purple. But I think Lieutenant Uhura in Star Trek, of course, also had a big influence on me, because she was the only black woman in any cultural production that I was aware of when I was growing up in the 1970s. And she was always in conversation with Captain Kirk, which wasn't unusual for me to see a black woman and a white man in conversation, because my mother's Fijian and my father's European. But yeah, she had a big influence on me too, and she wore mini skirts, and she was a communications officer on a spaceship, and yeah, so I was kind of, I think you can tell I'm a science fiction nerd. Yeah, I don't know.
My answer is not very intellectual, but it comes from a place of truth. It would be remiss of me to deny the impact that the Babysitters Club series had upon me. As a reader, as a writer, as a human, it just did. Like 7 girls, all best friends, each with their own diverse personalities, backgrounds, styles of dressing. It was something to latch onto. I was like a little bit of a lonely child. Perhaps I got in my way a little bit, you know. I didn't necessarily make it easy for myself, but in these books, it was like a whole world of friends, of girls, of living, you know. And so as well as giving me something to cling on to, they also, I don't know, I think the Babysitters Club books genuinely did help me along my way with my writing. I realised that I kind of reverse engineered fan fiction. Like, I didn't know what fan fiction was as a youth, but I still came to it. I was essentially writing what we would now call fan fiction. And I'm still very grateful to those books. And I think as well, like, even though they were entirely heterosexual, but I've come to learn later in life that Anne M. Martin, the author of it, is gay. And I'm like, yeah, that tracks, you know. I think something about them as well helped me recognize my queerness in a very subconscious way, you know. Again, it's just that obsessiveness with girls. I was obsessed with these girls, and yeah. Yeah, and there are novels that are more, you know, in the literary canon that have had a huge impact upon me. There are novels that I will reread and be inspired by, and you know, there are authors that I'm grateful to for the characters and the stories they build. But I think when it comes down to it, it is the Babysitters Club. Yeah.
I think this happened in 2 stages for me, and the first stage was with work that was by heterosexual writers. And the obvious example of that is that when I was 8 years old, my dad gave me a copy of The Stand by Stephen King, and then I became obsessed with his career. I still love horror. But I think Stephen King writes teenage boys, like, they're really heterosexual, but they hate girls, and they talk about their penises all the time. And I don't know why that was appealing. And then I distinctly remember as well, I mean, this is still in this stage, I'm a neurotic list maker. I love lists. And when I was 11 or so, I was obsessed with IMDb, which is like the movie categorizing platform. And they had their like new movie trailer section there. And this trailer came out that was 5 minutes long for this movie Cloud Atlas. And I was obsessed with that trailer for no reason, really. I was just like, this looks mean. And I really, really wanted to see the movie. And I then discovered that it was based on a book by David Mitchell, not the comedian, the other one. And I got my hands on the book and I read it. I think that was the first time that I ever read gay characters that were explicit. And there's kind of a funny story about that because the movie didn't end up coming out in New Zealand and it was R16. So I had to buy the DVD from Amazon online, and then it was a Region 1 DVD, so I had to save up my pocket money when I was 12 to get a region-free DVD player to be able to watch it. And while the DVD was on its way to New Zealand, someone leaked the movie on YouTube. And I watched half of it before Mum and Dad were like, oh, we have to go out. And by the time I got home, the movie had been taken down again. So it took me about a year and a half to finally see Cloud Atlas. But it's still one of my favourite texts. I had another answer as well, but I got distracted by the Cloud Atlas story, so that'll be that. I guess the Cloud Atlas film is an example where the Wachowski sisters are queer, and that was a later example of later discovering that the creator of something that I felt an immediate connection to was queer. And I do think that's a strange thing that happens a lot. Sometimes I'll read something and I'll be like, I don't know why this feels like it's in my language. And it's always because it turns out the writer is queer. And it's a very strange thing. There is something that happens to language that relates to who you are. And I don't know what it is. I think it's magic.
Thank you. My next question's around, I mean, we've all been Teina at one stage, and I'm looking at a couple of people on this panel, and they might still be Teina, I don't know, but I don't know that. But when was there a point in your career where you felt that change, where the experience, you felt experienced enough, and you were being called upon to mentor, you're being called upon to develop and read scripts? When was that, and how did that make you feel to be that person?
I think it happened when I had to go and speak to a school, to school kids, high school kids, and I think it's really powerful that. I always remember a story that Selena Tusitala-Marsh tells about when Sam Hunt came to speak at her school and what a huge influence that had on her as a poet. And I kind of think when I went into these schools, I didn't quite know how to pitch to these young people, but I managed to get through the class. And I've spoken at a few schools now, and I think that's a really important part of that Tuākana role. And I think, I don't know if I'm very good at it, but I think that if I can get through to even one person to encourage them to write, then I think that's a good thing. So I think, yeah, speaking at schools is a really important part of our role as writers. And just, yeah, that's when I really felt like a tuakana.
I feel hard out, still in Teina mode. But this, like a phrase that I use quite a bit in terms of writing is that the goalposts are always shifting. This might just be how I approach my career, such as it is. In that, like, will I ever be satisfied? Like, will I ever be, I'm a writer, I'm not. Like, we were joking before about how, like, I'll be 60 years old and I'll still be like, well, I'm an aspiring writer at the beginning of my career. But, you know, we're all on a sort of continuum. You know, there are people that are ahead of me and there are people that see me as having achieved a lot, which, you know, which is cool. And I think it's good to get out of your head and to see that kind of, that continuum, because yeah, sometimes you can just get stuck on those goalposts, and then when you get a little bit further ahead, the goalpost moves further away. Yeah, so that's where I'm at with my fiction and poetry. You know what I mean? I feel like I'm still very, very on the come up. With my food writing, I've definitely felt more that I've been on the Tuākana side. I had, in 2013, my cookbook was published by Penguin, and I mean, that was an ultimate goalpost, you know. Where else do you want to go with your food writing? Like, a cookbook is it. And then, as the cliche goes, it was one of those situations where, you know, what happens if you get your dream and it's not everything you thought. But for a moment there, I was on that extreme high, and then, as all these things do, it came down again, and now I'm in a bit of a fallow period, but it's okay because we can go back up again. And yeah, I just think as writers, it's important to keep that perspective and to think who's ahead of me and who's behind me, not in terms of who's better than me and who's worse than me, but literally where are we standing, and how can I reach out to this person, or how can I reach back to this person? Yeah, and no matter where you're standing, even if you've just written some poems and put them in a zine and no one else has read them, that's an achievement, and that's a stepping stone, and that's more than someone who hasn't, Even if you're just writing little short stories for yourself, that's still, you're on, it's a stepping stone. Yeah, there's someone ahead of you, but there's someone that'll look to you and be like, man, I wish I was doing that. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm definitely feeling still in Teina mode as well, but I think what you're saying about the goalposts is so true. I think there's a fundamental thing, at least in my head and heart as well, I think, if you write anything, if it's for yourself, you're already a writer, the process that happens after that is something else that may or may not be for you. And that has a lot of social dimension to it as well, and a lot of political complexity too. I like young people. I educate sometimes. Most of my educational background is related to the theatre work that I do, but over the last year or so, I've started teaching writing more so. And just one very lovely, sweet little moment was earlier this year, with Ray Shipley and a few others. We taught at the Write On School for Young Writers summer school, and then one of the students that we taught and helped develop a poem there then read that poem at Ray's late night poetry hour later that month, and that just felt like a moment of, we've got you. And that's kind of one of those moments where you know that you are carrying someone up into a space, or helping them get into a space that they otherwise wouldn't have been. Yeah.
In our last discussion, last question, it was brought up about fiction and how the subject matter may not be a queer or rainbow subject matter, but written by queer takatapu writers, and we could notice and relate to that. So my next question is around that. I write plays and films, and most of my work is not around our experience, but definitely from the lens of a proud takatapui man. And I know that a lot of our work doesn't necessarily focus on our queer experience, but how important is it for us to be out there and be visible and to be published and to have our voices out there, whether or not we write about our worlds or not?
Oh, yeah, I think it's really important. I remember when I was doing my Masters of Creative Writing, I said to Selena, my supervisor, I said, I don't want to be political, I just want to be a writer. And she said to me, Gina, you are a queer Fijian woman. You can't help anything you write is going to be political. So I was like, oh, okay. So I kind of had to give up that I don't want to be political and accept the fact that just putting my writing out there is a political act. And so I think it is important that we do that, and that we continue to do that, and that we accept that that's goes with the territory of writing. Anything you write is really coming through your lens. Whatever you write is coming through the lens of your experience, and so only our experience can be written by us, although other people will try to do that, I'm sure. But that's why I think it's important that we do put our writing out there, because only we can put our experience out there, and if we don't do it, then other people will do it for us, and they may not have the right to do that. So yeah, I think it's very important that we publish and put our work out.
Yeah, tautoko. I don't have a lot to add to that because that was said so beautifully, but I like when I was younger, I know that I read a lot of, or I definitely watched a lot of movies, and I watched a lot of TV, and I read a lot of books where I didn't know at the time, but the creators or the actors or so on and so forth, there was queerness in it. Like I think we do just somehow gravitate towards it without even knowing, or maybe we find out later. But I feel like, let me see, when I was young, there was one book, it was called Dare, Truth or Promise by Paula Book. I don't know if anyone else has read that. My mum got that for me. I don't know if she knew, I cannot stress how little, like non-existent queer representation was growing up in Waiuku in the 90s. And let's face it, it was the 90s, it wasn't the 50s, it wasn't the 70s. Nonetheless, there was nothing at all. And then I read this book and I was like, whoa! It was like looking into the face of the sun, you know what I mean? I almost felt a bit sick, not sick as in disgusted, but just like, you know the feeling. And so I'm so glad, I'm so grateful that we live in an era where, even though there's, as we often say, there's still work to be done, things are not perfect, but there is so much more representation. Queer writers and queer creators can write and create about the queer experience, or they can write and create about the most driest, they can write product descriptions, they can write landing pages, they can write SEO keyword blogs if they want, but there's queer representation out there, and we don't have to seek it from one single source, we don't have to seek it from one single person. One person doesn't have to be, the one perfect queer person, and I think it's really lucky, and the more of us that are doing it, the better. Yeah.
That's a really nice point to jump off of. I think, for me at least, queerness is about multiplicity. It's about the idea of being multiple and there being multiple voices and multiple experiences. And something that, for me at least, is inherent in the concept of queerness is that what is queer, and I recognise some people are not comfortable with using that word, that's just my preference, will change over time, and that what comes to be the new fight will change over time. And I think that maybe that relates somewhat to the form. I guess to go back to Cloud Atlas, for example, the form of the novel, which I actually don't know if David Mitchell is queer or not, but I don't think he is, follows 6 different stylistic threads, and the film does that as well. So the form itself is multiple, and I think there's a heavy correlation as well between complexity and queerness as well, between things that are not what they seem, so things that are not obviously queer but have something under it, like the Babysitters Club, and whether that's intentional or not, I think it's there because of that understanding of multiplicity, the understanding that when you put something out there, you can't impose meaning on who's going to read it. Like, I can sit here and say my work is unpleasant and violent and hard to read, and someone else might be like, no, it's easy to read and attention-seeking, and I hate it. And that's cool, Or someone else might be like, it's delightful, I loved it, it made me feel very seen, but I want to meet that person.
Thank you. I heard this discussion about being placed in boxes, right? And I think automatically being takatapui, people just assume what you need to write about and what you should write about. And also being Māori, that kind of adds to that. But, the fact that we're doing what we're doing and proving that we will write whatever we bloody want to write. And I think that's really important as well, that we keep doing what we do.
I just want to go back very briefly to the question about books that kind of started to make us feel seen, because that feels related almost to what you were just saying as well, which is that when I read The Bone People for the first time about a year and a half ago, I was like, oh, that's what writing for this country is. It felt like the language somehow comes from here, which isn't always the case. That's just a very small thing. Oh, that book is amazing.
Where's Liam? How long have we got? Sorry, I didn't ask. 40? Okay, cool. Keeps the questions. So let's go look at my questions. So we've had really great discussions about mahi. What about actual representation? Let's have a talk about that and how important is that? We spoke about our own kind of careers and Tuākana Teina, but how important is for us to represent ourselves in our work?
Well, because I'm a science fiction nerd, I wanted to read about Pacific people in space, and there aren't very many books about Pacific people in space written by Pacific writers. So, you know what Toni Morrison said, if there is a book that you want to read and it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it. So that's why I decided to write Naviro, which is about Pacific people flying the spaceship into space. It's because I couldn't see us in any science fiction production, whether it was film or television, or although Temuera Morrison is in Star Wars, but yeah. I wrote that book. It's got a Pacifica woman who flies into space to save her sister from a whirlpool, and she has a lesbian relationship with a robot. So it's got queer representation in there as well. I don't know, it's a bit weird.
Something you said before about, being put into boxes and representation. I do not know how to say this in a way that sounds normal, but I feel like I'm always finding my box. No, I'm always sort of moving from box to box. Yeah, and so my representation of myself moves with it. What I'm trying to say, I've just been a million different people. I've been several letters of the alphabet of LGBTQ. I have discovered new words to describe myself. I've discovered new things about myself, and because I've been writing in some form for a long time, sometimes I look back on older work, and I'm like, oh, that was it's always me, but that was me representing myself then, and sometimes I do envy people that are very sure of themselves, but I'm like, I will find the thing eventually. When I learned the kupu takatapui, that felt like a real gift of a word to sort of sit within. It's a very beautiful word, and that is one that I'm very sure of. I love the word queer. I'm cool with, all of the other words as well. I'm pretty chill with them. But as I learn more about myself, my self-representation changes. And I think it's good to not think okay, well, I'm discarding those, I'm shedding them like a skin, It's just no, they're kind of within me matryoshka dolls, which is something that Rebecca Hawkes and Vanessa Makrovsky both mentioned last night in their segments at the events last night. And I feel like that's a term that's kind of stuck with me, they're all still within me, and I'm happy to just keep representing myself, whoever I may be, yeah.
I think there's a complexity to this as well, because we also take on what we see around us, right? I think especially growing up, maybe, when queerness is presented in a particular way, you feel like you have to then take it on and feed it back out in the same way. And I think there's a debate about this sometimes critically in relation to works that are about queerness. Maybe the two obvious examples being Call Me By Your Name, which is the film in particular, which is directed by a heterosexual director, and A Little Life, which is written by, is she heterosexual?
I thought you were going to say she here in the audience.
No, is she here? would hope not. Heterosexual Hawaiian woman. And what's interesting about those texts, I mean, initially for me, is that I love them both. They do feel like they capture some kind of truth. But then I wonder, do I feel like they capture some kind of truth because that's what other texts about queer people have said that I should react to over an extended period of time? And sometimes I just get completely surprised by an expression of queerness. Like, I remember watching Sense8, which is also by the Wachowski sisters, for the first time, and being like, queer people are allowed to be happy in media? That's a thing. I don't really have a point there other than that, there's a two-way process that happens. So it's both about what is put out and also what's taken in. And I guess that also relates to what we're doing as writers and why it's important for queer writers to have voices, is that if the voices that are expressing what queerness is are always doing that from the outside, how's that ever going to change?
Laura, you mentioned that we have come a long way, but there's still things that we need to do, and I agree. I mean, there's things that happen in the world that you read and you go, wow, I thought we were progressing. What do you think, as each one of you, what do you think there's still work to be done, and how do you want to, how can you contribute to that work through your writing? Yeah.
I think just by keeping going, really, and putting work out there. I think that's, for myself, I think that's as much as I can do. And I know I've had a couple of books published, but I still feel like a beginner every time I come to the page. And I think it's hard to keep going, but I think it's important that we do keep doing the mahi. I'm not quite sure what else to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, if I say like we've come a long way and there's work to do, I can be vague about that, and I think that we can all mentally backfill that with what we know to be true, what we know about how far we've come and what we know about what we need to do. I think it's a tough thing. And I don't know that I personally, one person, I don't know that I'm actually particularly effective, but I think that what's just incredibly important is connections and humanity, and not losing sight of that. We need to, it's very, it's kind of the blessing and the curse of social media, is that we can make instant connections, but also that it's very easy to forget that even the person saying the stupidest comment online is but a human, and where there is humanity, there is power to change. And oh my gosh, this was the vaguest, stupidest answer. I'm so sorry.
This
was just buzzwords and but I do believe it.
Well, on the note of people posting stupid shit online, one thing that we could all do to improve the lives of queer people going forward is take the new J.K. Rowling book and hide it behind a nice queer book by a lovely queer writer. If you don't know about J.K. Rowling's problems, I'll leave you to do that in your own time.
Thank you for that. I just want to contribute to that kōrero. I have a column in The Listener, and when they first approached me, I didn't want to do it. I've never written an opinion piece in my life. I've always written just feature articles and stuff. But then I looked at the readership of The Listener, and I didn't see myself. I'm not a reader of The Listener myself, so I don't actually read the magazine that I write for. But that's okay. And I just thought that it was really important, and I saw the other columnists, like Bill Ralston, and none of them looked like me. None of them had that lens. And I just kind of bit the bullet and said it's really important to to have this platform and to have this voice in such a mainstream and this reputable kind of publication in New Zealand. And so I wrote my first column, and I write about being takata, where I'm brutally honest about the lifestyle. I've written about my attack. I was gay bashed about 20 years ago. I've written about being in a home of abusive men, and I find it quite therapeutic, but in the sense also I know that this voice is being heard by people who need to hear it, so hopefully that's my contribution to breaking those barriers and giving people an insight of what it's like to be takatapui. So just wanted to add to that. What are you all working on now? What's your current projects? And how can people support that?
Okay, so I'm kind of like a magpie, flitting from one project to another project. I've got about 3 or 4 on the go. I don't know, I'm trying to write a horror story. So I'm reading a lot of horror at the moment, which is really, I've never read horror really, and I really love it, actually, like Stephen King. I'm trying to write poetry. I love poetry, but I'm trying to write another science fiction novel. Just lots of stuff.
Have you got anything out there that people can support and visit or read online?
I wrote a piece in the Listener recently. One of the summer stories. Yeah, but I haven't got anything else online. Oh yeah, and Sam's holding up my books. They're for sale.
And Laura, what are you working on now?
So my master's that I completed in 2022. As the result of that, I now have a novel manuscript, and I'm awaiting my marks. But so we'll see what happens with that. But I like it. I think it's pretty decent, and it doesn't have a ton of plot. It's very vibes only, but it's set in a small rural village, right? And it's about a sort of like a whānau and their legacy, and it's very gay, and it sort of jumps back and forth in time, and and actually, because so Renee was supposed to be here today, and she has long been an idol of mine since I was very young, and my mum gave some of her writing to me to try and slow me down as a reader, which it did. And she speaks in her autobiography of something that she calls messages from the bones, which is this sort of unspoken connection between the living and the dead whānau, and it's something that you can feel but not necessarily identify, and that's something that I took with me when writing my novel. So I can't really explain the plot because it's not there, but the vibes are excellent. I'm also just continuing to write poetry. I guess I have some kind of end goal in mind with that, which is to publish a collection. And I also have my food blog, which I've written since 2007. And which I'm continuing to write, and which it's the longest commitment that I've ever had in my life. It's the one thing I've been the most sure of. So, all of this, you can find my food blog at hungryandfrozen.com if you want. Hungry and Frozen. It's a line from a song from the musical Rent, and now I'm stuck with it. But it is what it is. That's fine with me. And then I'm also just Hungry and Frozen on any platforms, and I tend to share my poetry on Instagram, so yeah.
I'm in a bit of a research phase at the moment. I'm working on what I think will be a novel, if I have the stamina, that deals with, wait for it, there's a long list. It deals with policing in a post-dystopian Christchurch, where it rains all the time, and a new drug has been discovered or synthesized, or however they do that. Research needs to be done. That means that people think they can talk to animals when they're on it. So that's that. I should have a book coming out either end of this year or early next year, which will be with a New Zealand-based publisher, but I can't tell you anything about that right now. I think it's secret. Yep. I'm working on my notebook. Yeah.
Excellent. So that's lots of work there from this panel. I'm just going to open up to the floor if there's any questions for the last 10 minutes that anyone has for anyone on stage.
Some of you spoke about how you, like before you knew the characters or authors were queer, you felt kind of an affinity to the characters. Like it's like this kind of subconscious thing that you're drawn to. And I was wondering if the same is in your writing, whether you go about deliberately putting queer storylines into your writing, or if it just becomes because that's the vibe. And I guess like the same question because of the Tuākana Teina thing of this panel, and the same thing with your Māori or Pacific identity. Does that appear in the story? So deliberately, or poetry, is so like deliberately, or does it just find its way in?
I can just, I think with me, humour is really important, and if you've been to some of my plays, they're quite funny. They're not queer experiences, but I know that because I think with my friends, we're quite witty and sassy and funny, and it infuses in that experience. Just humour.
I think it's quite deliberate for me to write about characters, queer characters, and Pacific and Māori characters in New Zealand. Yeah, I yeah. I don't know.
I'm kind of at the point now where so I've written 2 novel manuscripts, and it's like I struggle to write straight people now. And I'm also just like, is it realistic, really, that someone would be straight? I don't know. I don't think that's really realistic for this character. So I think, yeah. But I found some old, I guess you could call them character studies from when I was very young, of writing down attributes of potential characters that I could then, turn into little novels or whatever. So I would have been about 10 or 11, and it's like, she's tall, she's a gymnast, she has spiky hair, she has a pierced nose, and it just goes on, and I'm like, you're gay. You don't know it, but you're, so I feel like when I was younger and doing my writing as a kid, it was subconsciously, it was like I was trying to find a way to be as queer as possible, up to the point of acknowledging actually being queer. So yeah, in terms of writing about, I'm Māori and I'm Pākehā, and my Māori whakapapa is an aspect of myself that it's incredibly important to me. It's something that I only have a tenuous amount of knowledge about, and as such I feel a bit of whakamā about that. I've felt a bit sort of uncertain about myself and about where I can put myself, how I can express myself, and so that is something that I'm tenuously but very deliberately working into my writing, as opposed to the queerness, which I think I just don't know if I can write about straight people at all, So that, yeah.
I think I've had almost the opposite experience. My first, I guess, self-conscious attempts to write, or when I started doing stuff that was for, designed to be put out there, it was about queerness. I have a lot to say about queerness, or had a lot to say about queerness. I still do, but I feel like I've said a lot of it now in my work. My initial kind of couple of poetry chapbooks deal with what it means to express queerness in language when you either are presenting your body as something that isn't queer, or you're presenting your language as something that isn't queer. How do the codes get switched? And so there was a really intentional drive to do that. Now it's shifting a little bit. Road is a book about this guy who gets kicked out of home and kind of walks into heaven/purgatory. That's what happens in it. But they even find themselves in a situation that is not heterosexual. I always imagined the character as heterosexual while writing them, but the plot just put them in queer situations without me asking for it too. So yeah, I have found that happening. And then, yeah, very, very similarly, the book that I should have coming out in New Zealand end of this year, beginning of next year, begins to very self-consciously kind of deal with my whakapapa and how that interrelates with this earlier work that I was doing that was almost designed for an American audience. And so I don't think there was really anything of New Zealand in the work for the American audience. There might be. I'd be really interested if anyone happens to come across it and feels like it's there. But yeah, that book next year, the first half of it will be a reprint of the book that the first book I did that only came out in America, and the second half attempts to recontextualize that into a kind of New Zealand identity framework. Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions?
Kia ora. I was just wondering about your Tuākana in terms of like craft and kind of at the sentence level, like who sort of, I guess, taught you to write in that way.
So in the Tuākana Teina, who taught you to write? So it's kind of craft specific answer.
I can go. I'm self-taught fully, but that doesn't actually mean self-taught. Do you know what I mean? Like writing is as much reading as it is anything else. The first time that I dealt with an editor, his name's Simon Morris, and he is a noise musician for like a punk band, and so his framework is like, let's punk this up, let's remove unnecessary words, and I think that's kind of like a path I've been following since then. I read a lot of theory. I'm really into Gordon Lish, who's like famously Raymond Carver's editor, which is a weird thing. Dennis Cooper has been helpful with that as well, but no one on like a sit down and teach level. It's been very casual. It's something that I would like to sit down and actually learn a bit more.
Yeah, I'm also very self-taught, and I think I sort of touched on this a little bit earlier, you know, with talking about being like a solitary writer, and I think I had a little bit of unearned arrogance about being self-taught, but in terms of specifically craft, it was my supervisor, James George at AUT, who is just a tremendously knowledgeable, cool guy, and just 100% leveled me up, and kind of, I love, it's scary as a writer when you invite feedback and scrutiny and perception, even though I'm also like, really want attention. But there's something so, I don't know, it's an amazing feeling when you actually when you realize what you don't know and what is ahead of you that you can know, and then just going and getting it. So yeah, specifically James George at AUT, which is not to say that, I don't think that the academic path is the be all and end all for writers, and I believe that there is a way for writers, to get mentorship, to get tuakana, to get craft expertise without having to get a student loan. But for me, that worked.
Yeah, I think a lot of my writing is self-taught as well, even though I've been through the academic pathway too. So Selena was very helpful for me when I was doing my masters, and same with my supervisors for my PhD, Tina and Tom. They were very helpful, and of course the editorial process is also you learn a lot from that as well, from editors and manuscript assessors. No prisoners taken.
It's good, but it's bracing,
Yeah, you're kind of like, kill my darlings. But it's always really good as well, I think, being in the company of other writers, and like that's what one of the things about doing a master's in a whole group of other people that read your work and give you feedback. They also can be very it can be very bracing, reading about other people's opinions about your writing. But I always learn something from that.
I had a 20-year career in journalism, so I had editors for 20 years every day reading my work, which helped in my creative process as well, because I was able to get feedback every day in the craft of writing. But also, as a journalist, we had deadline driven, and I think discipline is a really big one for writers, to be disciplined, and kind of learned that as a journalist, which was great. But what I'm getting here is that everybody, it is a solitary, and you do need tuākana to inspire you and help you, but at the end of the day, writing, you're using the muscle of the brain, and to get better, like any kind of exercise, to exercise any muscles, is to keep doing it as much as you can, learning. And that's what I found as well, is the craft of writing. You just need to write and keep doing it, and getting better, and getting the feedback from trainers, i.e. mentors or supervisors, and the discipline as well. It takes discipline to be a writer. Yeah. What was the question back there? Yeah.
I was just, we talked quite a bit about speculative fiction today, obviously sci-fi and horror. And I'm just wondering if anyone had any thoughts on like that interconnection between queer identities and speculative fiction, which for me is quite strong. I was wondering if anyone else felt that. Yeah.
Did you guys get the question?
Oh, well, especially with science fiction, there is always the alien other, which is what we are a lot of the time. So I think it's easy to write about that sort of representation of being alien in speculative fiction and in science fiction. And we're misrepresented in those genres, I think, often by people. So that's why I think it's good that we change that kind of perception of us as being alien, evil, other in that genre. And yeah.
Not necessarily speculative fiction, but I'm really into horror, obviously, as well. And I think there's something that very strange that happens in horror in a particular, under a particular lens, where you start identifying with the monster and stop identifying with the people who are supposed to survive. And I think that is...
Like the orcs.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, and I think that is a process of queering, and I think it happens, it has happened through queer criticism for ages in movies that were never intended to be queer, where you can watch something like A Nightmare on Elm Street. The second one is very queer, but the rest not so much. And you identify with Freddy Krueger because he's not the Christian child. I don't want to say I identify with Freddy Krueger. He's like a creep, but you get the point. That's not the best example, but there are others. And then over time, there's been a development of that, and it's now become almost self-consciously queer, where in a movie, maybe something a bit more ambiguous, like less slashery, like Raw by Julia Ducournau or Titan, queerness is baked in to those texts, and the monster is at least partially someone we're meant to identify with. It's that weird thing of like, I think there's an identification for queer people, and also other people could watch it and be like, evil monster.
So I don't actually have anything clever to add to this, because I don't have either of my fellow panelists' expertise on this, but I will just say that for me, my speculative fiction is musical theatre and seeking queer subtext in old Hollywood films. So while it's a different genre, I absolutely relate. Like Calamity Jane, yeah, it's all in the text. Johnny Guitar.
Probably time for one last question. Writing non-white characters for predominantly white audiences.
I don't write for a white audience. I write for myself. So if anyone can see whatever the reader wants to take from my writing, they can take from it. But I don't I suppose I should be I mean, some people say you should have the audience in mind when you're writing, but I really don't. I just write what I want to write.
Yeah, I also write what I want to write, and it's sort of predominantly it's the words that I have to get out, and whoever reads it is the audience. But I do understand what you mean in that publishing, the literary world, it's from a Pākehā framework. It's dominated by white people historically. You know, what we think of as the literary canon, it's all pretty white. And also I am, you know, even though I have I stand on a couple of intersections, but I'm a white woman, you know, and so this is something that I think about carefully when I'm writing characters. I write with intention, and I write with care, and I also write how I want to see the world, you know, the world that I want to see. But yeah, I don't know if that answered the question, sorry, but it is something that I do just carefully and intentionally.
I think the writing what you want to write thing is really important, and once again, I think the Bone People is a model for this. I mean, you hear like Pākehā audiences all the time go, "Oh, the Bone People's so difficult, it's so hard," and it's like my apologies to anyone who has found it difficult, but it's a modernist book which can be difficult if you're unfamiliar with it. But for anyone familiar with modernism, there's nothing difficult about it, and it's probably on the easier end of modernism. And I just suspect that the reo in the novel is part of the it's so hard kind of attitude. That is a very Māori novel, and I don't have any specific comment about like how to navigate that, other than that we should maybe take Kerry Hume's lead there and just write it because it's the right thing.
I spent 20 years in mainstream media. So I've worked for the Herald, I've written for the Herald, and mainly women's magazines as well. And if you know about mainstream media, audience is key and sales is key. So it's drummed into us that we need to write stories that appeal to a white audience that pick up the magazines and pick up and buy the copy. And that was actually a good training ground for me. So when I went into creative writing, I always think about audience. And it's like what do you call it? The wooden horse of the Troy, like it's Trojan horse, that's what it is. You know, because I'm able to apply those conventions of mainstream that is literally, you know, a white audience in mind, and be able to infuse the lens that I have. So that's what I do when I write, and it's like I said, it's 20 years of being in the mainstream that's ingrained to write for that audience. Yeah, but you can still infuse your lens in a way that if they're reading something in a way that they can relate to, and you actually kind of hit your messagings there. So yeah. On that note, thank you for the panel. Once again, thank you for coming, and have a great afternoon. Kia ora.